A few weeks ago, I was walking through Newtown Plaza in Shatin, and I witnessed a scene that felt like a perfect snapshot of the 21st century. I saw a young couple huddled over an expensive high-tech stroller, speaking in those hushed, doting tones usually reserved for a newborn. But when they stopped to adjust the sunshade, it wasn't a baby staring back. It was a Shiba Inu wearing a miniature designer sweater. And if you think that's just a quirky urban anecdote, well, the data suggests otherwise. The recent Hong Kong pet show drew a staggering 370,000 visitors in just 4 days, in a city where 43.2% of families are now childless and another 27.4% have opted for only one child. The fur baby isn't just a trend, it's a demographic takeover. To these couples, the choice is rational. They are escaping the crushing weight of housing costs and the tiger parent academic rat race. It feels like a personal victory for work-life balance, but there is a hidden ledger to this lifestyle. While we celebrate our freedom, the population structure is quietly flipping upside down. In 2024, about 23% of Hong Kong's population was 65 or older. By 2045, that figure is projected to climb past 33%. We are heading toward an inverted pyramid where the elderly support rate will hit 644 non-working seniors for every 1,000 people in the workforce. This isn't just a local glitch. From the Chinese mainland, where the population may soon dip below 1.4 billion, to India, where fertility has leveled off at barely 2.0, the world is hitting a collective brakes. We spent the last century terrified of overpopulation, implementing everything from China's one-child policy to India's controversial mass sterilizations in the 70s. But now that we've finally mastered the art of not having children, we have to ask, is a shrinking population an environmental relief or an economic suicide pact?
That is the single most important question facing the global economy right now. And, frankly, that suicide pact phrasing isn't hyperbole.
It feels dramatic, but when you look at the numbers...
It is dramatic. When we talk about an inverted pyramid, we aren't just talking about a shape on a graph. We are talking about a structure that is, it's physically unstable.
Right.
You cannot balance a massive, heavy, the elderly population on a shrinking, needle-thin base of young workers without something snapping. It defies the economic gravity of the last 100 years.
That image of the Shiba Inu really stuck with me, though. It was cute, sure, but it felt like I was looking at a substitute.
Yeah.
Like we've swapped out the messiness and the sheer difficulty of human biology for something clean and manageable.
Controllable variable.
Exactly, and it feels like we were looking at the East Asian demographic model as the sort of the canary in the coal mine for the rest of the world.
Absolutely.
What is happening in Seoul, Tokyo, and Shanghai today is very likely what will be happening in London, New York, and Berlin tomorrow.
We are watching a preview of the global future. And if we want to actually understand this, not just gawk at the low birth rates, we have to move beyond the simple numbers.
It's not enough to just see the line go down.
No, it's easier to look at a chart and say, oh, look, the line is going down. But that doesn't tell you why. For this deep dive, we really need to look at the triad of pressures that are essentially crushing the birth rate in these regions.
A triad. Okay.
First, we have what I call the economic loop, which is all about housing and status. Then there's the cultural trap, and this is about gender roles and ancient traditions clashing with modern life.
And the third.
And then we have the state response, how governments, particularly in China, are trying to use technology to fix what is, at its core, a biological and social problem.
So it's like a three-front war. You've got your wallet, you've got your family history, and then you've got the government trying to referee the whole thing.
That is a very, very accurate way to frame it. Yes.
Okay, let's start with the wallet then, the economic loop. Because whenever I talk to friends in these major cities, or even when I just look at the discourse online, the conversation almost always starts with rent, mortgages, and the sheer crushing cost of existing. It feels like the price of entry for adulthood has just skyrocketed into an impossible realm.
But we need to be really specific about where and why. This isn't just general inflation that you see everywhere. We need to zoom in on the specific economic feedback loop that's happening within these extreme urban environments.
Right.
I'm talking about places like Shenzhen, Seoul, or Tokyo.
Right. So to help everyone visualize this, I want to talk about a specific case. Let's call them Chen and Wei. They're a couple living in Shenzhen.
Okay.
Now, purely on paper, these two are the absolute success stories of the Chinese economic miracle. They're the urban elite. They work in tech and finance. They earn salaries that would make them royalty back in a rural province. But they live in a 30-square-meter apartment.
30 square meters. Just to put that in perspective for everyone, that is roughly the size of 2 parking spaces.
2 parking spaces, exactly. And they aren't living there because they're minimalists. They're living there because they are trapped in a very specific, very brutal calculation.
And what's the calculation?
To have a child in their district, you have to secure a spot in a key school. And in China, school admission isn't based on a lottery or anything like that. It is strictly tied to property ownership in that specific school district. It's what people call the housing to education pipeline.
So the address on your deed is your child's entire future.
So to get the kid into the good school, you need the apartment in the good district. But the prices in those districts are, well, they're hyperinflated, beyond reason.
And this is where the feedback loop kicks in,
Right.
right? The more people want the good education, the higher the housing prices go.
It means you have to work even harder to afford them.
And you have less time and money for a family. It feeds on itself.
And Chen and Wei, they run the numbers. They actually have a spreadsheet. And I think a lot of couples do this now, which is just heartbreaking in itself.
A spreadsheet for having a child.
Yeah. They plug in their income, the mortgage for a tiny 2-bedroom place in a key school district, the cost of tutoring, private lessons, and the result is always red. Every single month, the spreadsheet tells them that a child is an irrational economic decision.
An irrational decision.
A decision that would plunge them right back into the working poor category they fought so hard to escape.
And that's the tragedy of it. The spreadsheet isn't wrong. It's just reflecting a brutal reality.
I spent some time looking at the cost of living heat maps for cities like Tokyo and Shenzhen. We talk about the joy of parenting, but for the urban middle class in East Asia, that joy is being priced out by this structural inflation. When a tiny apartment costs 30 years of your combined labor, the biological urge to reproduce is just. It's crushed by the sheer weight of concrete and capital. It's a tragic paradox. The very cities built to generate wealth have become so expensive that they are effectively sterilized.
You hit on something absolutely crucial there, the idea of it being irrational. For Chen and Wei, this isn't an emotional decision anymore, it's an algorithmic one. But I want to push on this a bit deeper. Why is the housing so expensive? It's not just land scarcity.
Okay.
If you really dig into the research on housing prices in China, you find something fascinating. Housing isn't just a utility there. It's not just shelter. It acts as a status good.
A status good. Usually people use it for things like, luxury handbags or fancy watches, things you buy to show off.
Exactly. But housing operates on a much, much higher stake. In standard economics, you buy a house to live in it, for consumption. But in this context, the apartment is a signal. It's a signal in the marriage market. It is the entry ticket to even having a conversation about marriage with a woman's family.
Right. The old no house, no bride rule. I've heard that.
It's not just a stereotype. There was a survey, and the numbers are just shocking, where 80% of mothers with daughters said they explicitly would not accept a son-in-law who rents.
80%. So it's a hard line.
Fine. But here is the real insight. Interesting. Think about this through the lens of signaling theory in evolutionary biology. Do you know why a peacock has that massive, colorful, frankly ridiculous tail?
To attract a mate, right? To show off for the peahen.
Yes, but why is the tail attractive? It's heavy, it's bright, which makes it incredibly easy for predators to spot. It makes it hard to fly. Speaking cap.
So the tail is actually a burden. It makes its life harder.
Exactly. And that is the entire point. The peacock is signaling to the female, I am so genetically fit, so strong, and so healthy that I can survive even with this massive, stupid handicap attached to my rear end. The tail proves his quality because it is a burden.
Wow. That is a fascinating way to look at real estate.
It's the exact same mechanism. Buying a Tier 1 city apartment in a good school district is the modern economic equivalent of the peacock's tail. It is a massive financial handicap. It drains your resources. It stresses you out. It limits your freedom.
But by buying it,
the young man signals to the potential bride and her family, I am so financially capable, so competent, that I can survive this crippling burden.
So if you're a renter, you're basically a peacock with no tail feathers. You might be a great guy, smart, funny, kind, but you're signaling genetic, or in this case, financial weakness. You can't handle the handicap.
And this is why price is completely detached from the underlying reality of the property. You aren't buying shelter anymore. You're buying a mating signal. And the competition to send that signal is incredibly fierce because of the sex ratio imbalance.
Right. This is the long-term legacy of the one-child policy and the cultural preference for sons.
In some provinces, the ratio has been as skewed as 130 boys for every 100 girls.
Wait, 130? That's not a gap, that's a canyon. That means for every 13 men, 3 of them are just statistically guaranteed to be alone.
It is a bachelor bubble.
Yeah.
You have roughly 30 million surplus men in China. To put that in perspective, imagine the entire population of Malaysia, but it's just single men looking for wives.
That creates a kind of desperation, I imagine.
It creates a hyper-competitive market. And the empirical evidence is very clear on this. Regions with higher sex ratios have significantly higher housing prices. The data suggests that this status competition accounts for anywhere between 30 to 48% of the rise in real urban housing prices.
So almost half of the price increase is just men bidding up the cost of housing to outcompete other men for a shrinking pool of potential wives.
They're buying bigger, more expensive homes, not because they need the space for a family, but to outbid the other peacocks in the field.
But is it actually rational? Because looking at it from the outside, spending 30 years of your income on a concrete box just to get a date? It sounds completely insane. Are we sure this isn't just a collective delusion?
It is collectively insane, but individually rational. If you are a young man in that system and you don't play the game, you don't get married.
And if you don't get married,
you don't have kids. And if you don't have kids, your family lineage, which is incredibly important culturally, ends with you. So a couple like Chen and Wei, they are caught in the blast radius of this status war. Even though they're already married, the prices are being set by these desperate bachelors.
Wow. And it doesn't stop at housing, does it? Because once you have the house, and if by some miracle you manage to have the kid, then comes the next giant hurdle. We mentioned the housing to education pipeline.
Right. And this brings us to the cost of credentialism. In East Asia, there is a cultural obsession with academic qualifications that goes back centuries to the old imperial civil service exam systems. It is deeply, deeply rooted in the idea that education is the only path to social mobility.
I've heard it called education fever.
Think of it as a relentless arms race. If everyone has a bachelor's degree, you suddenly need a master's. If everyone speaks English, you need to speak English and also code in Python. To keep up, parents have to rely on what's called shadow education.
Cram schools, private tutors,
after-school academies, online courses, you name it.
I saw a stat that in places like Taiwan, Korea, and China, parents are privately paying for 50 to 70% of their children's total educational costs. That is a massive chunk of household income that's just gone.
It forces what economists call a quality-quantity trade-off. It's a very cold term for a very human decision. If you have limited resources, do you have 2 children and give them average resources? Or do you have 1 child or even no children and invest every single penny into ensuring that 1 child succeeds?
It's the all your eggs in one basket strategy, but on a national scale.
Parents are choosing to heavily invest in 1 child's success rather than diluting those precious resources across multiple children. So now you can see how the economic loop closes on itself, can't you?
Yeah, it's a perfect trap. Housing is brutally expensive because of marriage competition. Education is brutally expensive because of credential competition. And the rational response for a smart, capable couple like Chen and Wei, opt out. Just don't play.
Don't have the kid.
But here's the thing, and this is where it gets even more complicated. Even if you solve the money problem, even if you gave Chen and Wei that apartment for free, I'm not sure they'd have the kid. Because once you walk through that front door, you're not dealing with economics anymore. You're dealing with 2,000 years of history staring at you from the living room.
Right. You can subsidize an apartment, but you can't subsidize away centuries of ingrained gender expectations.
And this brings us to the cultural trap. And to the story of a woman we'll call Minna. Picture Minna. She's 34, a senior marketing executive in the Gangnam district of Seoul. She's successful, she drives a nice car, she manages a team of 20 people, she's completely financially independent, she is the very embodiment of the gold miss, highly educated, high-earning, single.
A modern Korean woman.
But she describes herself as profoundly tired. And every Sunday, she goes to her parents' house for lunch, and she says she shrinks.
She shrinks? What does she mean by that?
The air in the house is just thick with this unspoken weight. Her mother isn't asking about her latest marketing campaign. She's lamenting the lack of a proper son-in-law. She's talking about filial duty, about the responsibility to continue the bloodline.
The pressure.
And at the same time, Minna knows that in her hyper-competitive office, a pregnancy announcement is viewed by her colleagues and bosses as a professional suicide note.
Wow. Professional suicide note. That is a brutal, brutal phrase.
But that's her reality. She is expected to be this modern corporate powerhouse at 9 a.m. and then somehow transform into a submissive, traditional Confucian daughter-in-law by 6:30 p.m. It's an impossible double life.
You can't be both people at once.
So she has chosen, quite rationally, she says, to remain voluntarily childless to protect the autonomy she worked for 20 years to build. And looking at her story, it's easy to judge the coldness of this new generation, but we have to acknowledge the impossible pincer maneuver they are caught in.
Absolutely. On one side, you have these ancient, rigid social norms, and on the other, a cutthroat corporate culture that doesn't leave any room for a crib. Her choice isn't selfish, it's self-preservation.
The quiet rebellion.
A quiet rebellion is a very powerful way to put it. Minna's situation illustrates the cultural trap perfectly. We are dealing with the legacy of Confucian norms clashing violently with modern economic realities.
When we talk about Confucian norms in this context, what are we actually talking about? Because Minna isn't, living in a feudal village. She's in Gangnam.
No, not. But the software running the society still has some very old code in it. Historically, it refers to the 3 obediences. A woman was expected to obey her father before marriage, then her husband after marriage, and finally her son if her husband passed away.
A life of obedience.
It's a social structure built entirely on patriarchal lineage and continuity.
But Minna has a master's degree. She probably earns more than most men her age. That old code must be full of bugs by now.
And that is the modern mismatch. East Asian women have achieved massive, incredible gains in education. In many areas, they've actually surpassed men in tertiary enrollment. They are participating in the workforce at high rates. But the domestic sphere, the home, that hasn't changed.
So the workplace modernized, but the living room didn't.
Just look at the data on domestic labor. In South Korea, women still perform about 85% of all domestic chores.
85%.
It doesn't matter if they work a full-time, high-pressure job, just like their husband. When they come home, the second shift begins. And it's not seen as a negotiation. It's an expectation.
That's not a partnership. That's just having an unpaid employee who happens to live with you.
And it's an unpaid employee who is also expected to manage the emotional labor for the entire extended family. This is filial piety, or shao. The burden of caring for elderly in-laws, taking them to doctor's appointments, cooking for them, managing their lives, often falls squarely on the daughter-in-law.
Right.
So for someone like Minna, marriage doesn't just mean a husband. It means acquiring a whole new set of parents to care for on top of her own career and her own parents.
It sounds less like a marriage and more like a hostile merger where you acquire all the company's debt and none of its assets. And I guess this is fueling the more radical responses we're seeing, like the 4B movement in Korea.
The 4B movement is fascinating because it's not just a lifestyle choice. It's a political stance.
No.
It is a direct reaction to this exact mismatch you're describing.
And for those listening who haven't heard of it, 4B refers to 4 no's: Baihan, no marriage; Baishulsan, no childbirth; Bayunao, no dating; and bisexu, no sex.
It is a total and complete withdrawal from the patriarchal system. The argument made by proponents is that the system is fundamentally unsavable, so the only way to win is not to play the game at all. It started in online feminist forums, but it has absolutely bled into the real world.
It's basically a marriage strike. A labor strike, but the labor is marriage and childbirth.
And it explains so clearly why government policies like, cash handouts for babies or housing subsidies are failing so spectacularly.
They're trying to solve the wrong problem.
Exactly. The government is trying to bribe women into a system that they fundamentally reject. You can't fix a professional suicide note, as you so powerfully called it, with a baby bonus check. If the underlying contract of marriage feels like exploitation, no amount of money will make Minna sign it.
There's another piece of this puzzle that I found really interesting in the research regarding what's called the marriage gatekeeper.
Yes. This is a unique demographic trait of East Asia that makes the situation much more severe. In places like Europe or the US, you have a high percentage of non-marital births.
Right. Cohabitation is common. Having kids before you get married is, not a big deal for many people. In France, what is it? Something like over 60% of babies are born out of wedlock.
Right. But in East Asia, the sequence is incredibly rigid. It's almost unbreakable.
You must marry to have a child.
Non-marital births in a place like Korea are around 1.5%.
1.5%? That is virtually non-existent.
Because of social stigma, registry laws that make it difficult, and intense family pressure. So in East Asia, marriage is the sole gatekeeper to fertility. If women like Minna reject marriage, the gold mist phenomenon, then fertility just plummets to near zero.
There's no backstop.
There's no cohabitation baby boom to save the numbers or soften the decline.
So if the marriage rate falls, the birth rate falls in perfect lockstep. There's no safety net of partnerships or long-term boyfriends having kids to sort of cushion the blow.
And that rigidity, that lack of an alternative path to family formation, is what makes the demographic cliff so steep and so terrifying for policymakers.
Okay, so we have the economic crush, the peacock tail of housing, and we have the cultural trap, what you call the unpaid internship of marriage. Now let's look at how the governments are responding, because they aren't just sitting back and watching this happen.
Well, they're panicking.
And it seems like China, in particular, is trying something very, very different from its neighbors in Japan and South Korea.
China is definitely taking a more, let's call it an engineered approach. They have a capacity for long-term, state-directed planning that allows them to pull levers other countries just can't.
To illustrate this, I want to talk about a man named Mr. Zhao. He lives in a smart community on the outskirts of Hangzhou.
Okay.
Now, Mr. Zhao is in his late 70s. In a different timeline, or maybe in a different country, he might be languishing in a crowded hospital in the city center or relying entirely on an exhausted daughter-in-law like Minna. But his reality is very different.
So, what makes it a smart community?
Well, his life is mediated by what's called a digital twin health system. His vitals, heart rate, blood pressure, sleep patterns are all monitored by passive sensors integrated into his modest apartment.
So he's wired up.
Not him, the apartment. The floor can detect if his gait changes, which might signal a fall risk. The toilet analyzes everything and sends the data to a health clinic. He's part of a national strategy to decentralize the elderly population, moving them away from the suffocating, expensive core of Tier 1 cities.
Oh, he's getting high-tech care without clogging up a major hospital.
Exactly. And he's not just sitting around. He spends his afternoons teaching a local robotics club for kids, which is a role facilitated by a regional economic balance initiative that brought tech industries and young families to his doorstep. It's intergenerational.
This is a perfect example of China's integrated national strategy. While Japan and Korea are often seen as struggling with labor rigidities and slow political change, China is trying to pivot using the state's massive capacity for planning and infrastructure investment.
Almost sci-fi. But what is the economic theory driving this? Why move Mr. Zhao to the outskirts?
One of the key policy levers is fiscal decentralization. The central government is using tax and fiscal policy to give local governments, like in Hangzhou or in inland provinces, the power and the money to narrow the economic gap between them and the super-rich coastal cities.
So they are actively trying to make the inland areas more attractive so people don't all have to flock to Beijing and Shanghai to find a good job or get good care.
Exactly. It reduces the immense pressure on those mega cities. Mr. Zhao doesn't have to be in a crowded, expensive city center to get world-class care. He could be in a smart community on the outskirts because the high-speed rail, the 5G network, and the funding have all been pushed there strategically.
But they're also trying to solve the problem of a shrinking workforce. And this is where the economic models get really interesting. You mentioned before we started the difference between the solid growth model and endogenous growth theory.
Yes. Okay, let me explain this as simply as I can. Imagine an economy as a bakery.
Okay, I love bread.
The old model, the solid growth model, basically says that if you want to bake more bread, you need two things. More bakers, that's labor, and more ovens, that's capital. If you run out of bakers, because your population is shrinking, your bakery eventually stops growing. You produce less bread. This is the core fear of the inverted pyramid.
Right. No bakers, no bread. Simple.
But China is realizing they are running out of bakers. They can't make more young people appear out of thin air. So they are betting everything on a new model endogenous growth theory.
And what does that model say?
In this model, you don't just add more people. You upgrade the recipe and you upgrade the tools. They are inventing a new kind of robotic oven that lets one baker bake 1,000 loaves in the time it used to take 10 bakers to bake 100.
So you don't need more people. You need better technology and smarter people.
Precisely. That is human capital education and skills and technology. The theory says that even if the workforce shrinks, if the remaining workers are highly educated and backed by massive R&D spending and automation, the economy, the GDP, can still rise.
And that's where the Made in China 2025 push comes in. It's not just about competing with the West.
It's about national survival. It's not just about making better phones or electric cars. It's about using AI and robotics to fill the massive gaps that will be left by the shrinking workforce. Mr. Zhao's digital twin health system isn't just a cool gadget, it's a labor substitute.
A labor substitute. Ow.
Instead of needing a human nurse to come and check his blood pressure 3 times a day, the sensors in his apartment do it 24/7. That one nurse can now remotely manage 50 elderly patients instead of just 10. You've increased productivity by 500%.
It effectively turns the demographic problem into a technological frontier. It's almost like they're trying to automate the process of aging.
And it is a profound philosophical trade-off. You trade the warmth of traditional human-to-human care, which relies on a labor force you no longer have, for the efficiency of data and algorithms.
It's a very pragmatic, if a little cold, solution.
And frankly, given the sheer scale of the aging population in China, hundreds of millions of people, it might be the only viable solution on the table.
It's definitely agile, but it feels like a massive society-wide experiment. We've never seen a society age this fast and try to solve it with algorithms before.
And this brings us to the broader question of the welfare state. Because what we are seeing across all of East Asia is a fundamental transformation of how capitalism and social welfare interact.
Right, because historically, these weren't welfare states in the European sense with huge social safety nets, were they?
No. The research describes the model as productivist welfare, or sometimes the developmental welfare state. For a very long time, the welfare was just having a job.
Welfare through work.
Exactly. The governments didn't spend much on unemployment benefits or pensions. The deal was you had a job, often a lifetime job in places like Japan, and you had a strong family unit. The Confucian family was the safety net. If you got sick or old, your family was obligated to take care of you.
So the whole system breaks down when both of those pillars crack at the exact same time. The 1997 Asian financial crisis shattered the lifetime employment guarantee for millions. And as we discussed with Minna, the Confucian family unit is buckling under the pressures of modern life, urbanization, and changing gender roles.
And democracy played a really interesting role here too, especially in Korea and Taiwan. As they democratized in the 80s and 90s, politicians had to actually compete for votes for the first time. And how do you buy votes?
You promise people things?
Security. You promise social protection. This led to a very rapid expansion of universal health insurance and state pensions as he tried to quickly catch up to where Japan was.
But is it enough? We talked about the care crisis that's looming.
It's the gap between policy on paper and reality on the ground. Governments are now throwing money at the problem. On the Lux, South Korea has 52 weeks of paternity leave. Incredible. That's more generous than many places in Europe.
But nobody takes it. Right.
The uptake is extremely low. Why? Because of corporate culture. If you're a man and you take that leave, you are signaling you're not serious about your career. You lose status. You might not have a desk when you come back.
So they have these surrogate policies, subsidies for farmers, handouts for small businesses that act as a kind of hidden welfare, but they are inefficient.
They're trying to patch a system that needs a fundamental redesign.
And it feels like we are circling right back to the inverted pyramid. The family won't do the caring because they're overworked and a daughter-in-law's role is being rejected. The state can't afford to hire enough humans to do it because the tax base is shrinking every year.
Which leads us right back to Mr. Zhao in his smart apartment. If the family won't and the state can't hire enough humans, then technology must fill the gap. We are moving, perhaps inevitably, toward a future where the care void is filled by machines, sensors, and AI.
We've gone from a Shiba Inu in a stroller in a Hong Kong mall to a sensor-laden apartment on the outskirts of Hangzhou. We've seen Chen and Wei spreadsheeting their way out of parenthood in Shenzhen, and Minna going on a marriage strike in Seoul.
It is a sweeping continent-wide transformation.
And I have to come back to the question I posed right at the beginning. Is this a suicide pact or is it relief? Because looking at the environmental data, fewer people is good for the planet. Less carbon, less consumption, less strain on resources.
In the very long run, 100 years from now, perhaps it is a relief for the planet, and maybe housing prices will eventually stabilize when there's less demand. But the transition, the next 50 years.
That's the brutal part.
The transition is brutal. It's an economic squeeze where the shrinking young generation is being asked to pay for the healthcare and pensions of a bulging older generation with fewer and fewer people to share the burden.
It's a complete renegotiation of the social contract.
Fundamental. Yes. It's a renegotiation between men and women about who does the work at home and what marriage means. It's a renegotiation between citizens and the state about who pays for care and what we are owed in old age. And most profoundly, it's a renegotiation between humans and technology. about how much of our humanity we're willing to outsource to algorithms just to survive.
That is a heavy thought, that the gold miss and the smart community aren't just anomalies, they are prototypes for the future.
They are the prototypes for a future where we have perhaps traded the chaotic, messy vitality of the multi-generational home for the efficient, quiet, and maybe lonely autonomy of the digital age.
You know, we've talked about the elderly and we've talked about the parents who are opting out, but the one group we haven't really touched on is the children who are born into this new world. In a world of inverted pyramids where every single child is a precious national investment, monitored by algorithms from birth, and burdened with the implicit expectation of supporting a massive elderly population. It makes you wonder what childhood even becomes.
It's a heavy weight to place on a small number of shoulders.
It just feels we might be moving past raising children and into an age where we are manufacturing human capital just to keep the lights on for everyone else. That's the thought I think I want to leave you with, especially the next time you see a very well-dressed dog in a very expensive stroller.
Sure.
We'll see you next time.